Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the second season of the Flight Circuit for episode 4. I'm Hridhay and with me today is Hrishit Asal.
And in today's episode, we'll be talking about the next big thing. In the 1980s, we had the very first cellular network standard, 1G, which could support speeds up to 2.4 kbps. Then in the 1990s, we saw 2G, supporting speeds up to 40 kbps, followed by 3G in 1998 with speeds up to 2 mbps. Finally, in 2008, 4G was born, with speeds up to 100 mbps, supporting HD mobile TV, video conferencing, etc. 5G is the fifth generation technology standard for broadband cellular networks, which cellular phone companies began deploying worldwide in 2019 as the planned successor to 4G networks, which provide connectivity to most current cell phones. 5G supports a theoretical maximum speed of 20 Gbps, as well as lower latency and other improvements over older standards. To put these numbers into perspective, with an average 5G speed of 5 gigabytes per second, you can download 2 full seasons of The Office on Netflix in just 8 seconds. How does
Oh
5G
man,
actually work?
that's some solid speed. I think we really need 5G, given that I still buffer my YouTube on Geo, so my data would be better off on 5G. But anyway, moving on to how 5G actually works. And like other telecommunication systems, 5G also uses EMAG waves to transfer info from one place to another. The difference is that 5G uses higher frequencies that enter the microwave section of the electromagnetic spectrum from the radio wave section. The most publicized version of 5G uses millimeter wave technology, which is a new section of the very high frequency spectrum from 20 gigahertz to about 96 gigahertz. But unfortunately, such high frequencies also translate to range constraints because when you have high frequencies, you have shorter wavelengths, and naturally, because of that, the range is less. So there's also low band 5G, which uses frequencies below 1 gigahertz, and mid band 5G, which uses the middle between low band and high band, but has less range compared to low band 5G.
So the
Also,
biggest difference
yeah.
the biggest difference between 4G and 5G actually is latency, because 5G promises low latency of under 5 milliseconds, while the latency with 4G ranges from 60 milliseconds to 98 milliseconds. And in addition, with lower latency comes also the advancements in other areas such as faster download speeds and lossless audio.
Yeah, so just to put latency into some perspective here, it basically means the lag or the difference in speed between two successive bytes or bits reaching your device through the internet. And with lossless audio, it can become a much greater reality when we have 5G, because lossless means that you do not lose any quality of the sound or any range of frequency of the sound. And that will be better done when there's a lower latency, and that can be achieved through 5G. So lossless audio is something that Bluetooth is also not capable of. And I think Apple is working on lossless audio for their new AirPods Pro 2. So it'll be interesting to see how they link that up.
Yeah. All right. So how about we move on to some of the applications of 5G, how 5G is actually going to help us steer our ships into the future.
Yeah, so
All right.
as you say, steer your ships, Rishad, I'm going to talk about driverless cars instead of ships.
Oh,
Uh, so 5G, again, because of its much lower latency, is going to let cars and AIs communicate in virtually real time. And that's going to help driverless cars in preventing, in these systems rather, that organize the movement of driverless cars. And when I say driverless cars, I also mean driverless taxis that are connected to a common server that then plan the routes of these taxis based on their locations and requests for a ride. And when you have lower latency rates, this translates into like X number of vehicles, causing a much lesser factor of congestion on streets, as cars can make sure that they don't come in each other's ways, or it makes a much more efficient way of planning how these taxis or cars move around the roads. Then there's
right, right. So
also, yeah,
instead of having people just looking at Google Maps to see, oh,
yeah,
there's a red line over here, there's a lot of traffic over here, we can have the cars actually talk to each other and say, all right, you go here and I'll go there, and we make
yeah,
sure that never
yeah.
going to be a red line.
And the reason we haven't been able to do this before with stuff like 4G and 3G is because, again, because of the latency, it's too high. So it then poses a safety risk because the communication lag can be too high, and because of that, it'll either be inefficient or unsafe. But 5G sort of solves that issue. There's also the medical applications, which is quite unheard of. Like even I was quite surprised to research this, but 5G will allow real-time diagnosis and surgeries from across the world over the internet, which is something I feel is really cool, and it's a huge advancement for the medical industry, especially in hospitals in rural areas where they don't have access to that high-quality diagnosis AIs and systems. They can use the internet to diagnose, and 5G will really facilitate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure that doctors from all over the world, from different countries, will really be able to help out patients maybe at the other end of the world. And that would really, really be a booster for health systems of all countries. And how he was speaking about driverless cars and all of them being interconnected, I think we can really go beyond just cars, and pretty much any device that can connect itself to the internet will be connected in a much faster and much better way through 5G. And that is essentially the definition of IoT, or Internet of Things, where we have all our smart devices ranging from fridges, smart speakers, smart lights, laptops, TVs, everything connected across the internet, all devices communicating with each other at the same time to make sure that our lives are always comfortable and always efficient. And with 5G, this communication can be in real time with almost zero latency, which is a really, really good point in favor of these new technologies. And apart from that, we also have advancements in virtual reality and
The
virtual
metaverse. The metaverse is going to do great because of this.
metaverse, of course. Right. And so the current frameworks for these, as far as the making of all of these frameworks is concerned, is pretty advanced. We have amazing programs written for all of these, but the constraints that these face are, of course, speed and data. And I think with 5G, again, due to higher speeds, lower latency, all of this can be solved, and the metaverse would be sort of like the real universe in real time.
Yeah.
And of course, um, as a another application, we have virtual business meetings that could take place, and these could be really high quality video calls in which companies and businesses can share their ideas, business models, and who knows, we'll have companies making deals online now.
Yeah, and I just thought of another application actually. So, in COVID, like we had Encore and all in school for which like bands had to record separately and then like go through the headache of having to patch together the audio and then a video using iMovie and Pro Max Audio. Um, I don't know if 5G will solve it. Maybe 6G will, but it might allow for bands to play live together virtually. Because
Right,
if you
right.
have a much lower latency rate, if you can make the latency rate lower than that of sound in a closed environment, like sound is 330 meters per second, and in a band room, say, you're like 5 meters apart. So, if you can make that latency less using 5G or 6G, then you can effectively like record as a band or perform virtually as a band from your houses, and that's really, really cool. In fact, I don't know. It might come to a point where 5G or 6G or 7G becomes more efficient and has a lesser latency than recording in a real band.
Yeah,
Yep.
of course.
That'd be pretty cool.
That would be something to really look forward to. In fact, I
Yeah.
remember 2 years ago when the COVID lockdown started, we were recording, our band was recording for a performance, and we had to submit our video online. And it was such a headache to record everything separately. And how you said combine it on
Yeah.
iMovie. Yeah, those were hard times.
They really
Anyway.
were. Yeah.
moving on with what else?
We
So
have
like these,
we haven't discussed problems of
yeah, of course,
implementing 5G. Um,
right.
I
So
think, yeah,
as we already touched upon, the 5G um, comes in higher frequencies than 4G and 3G,
yeah,
and these frequencies allow larger packets of data to be transferred in less time, thus resulting in higher speeds. But due to higher frequencies, the wavelengths are also much shorter, and this causes the problem of having less range. So for example, if you're standing dead in front of a 5G cell tower, you would get speeds up to say 1200 Mbps. But even if you have something like a brick wall or a tree in your way, or if you just move around the corner, you'll see those speeds drop drastically low to still very high speeds of maybe 200 Mbps, but still not as cool as the 1.2 Gbps you would get uh, when you were direct in the direct line of sight of the tower. So to put this into perspective, supposing you have an aircraft which can fly a certain range depending on how much fuel it has, right? So if you want to extend the range of that aircraft, you would have to increase the fuel capacity of the aircraft. But in doing that, you're also reducing the space on board for, say, equipment or passengers. So there's sort of this trade-off of what should get preference, the passenger number of passengers or the range of the aircraft. And similarly, we see this trade-off even in 5G as to how high should the speed go or how high should the frequency be so that we can maintain a decent range. So the very first solution that people will think of to such a problem is, well, we can just put multiple towers or multiple antennas at every street corner and probably even on every building. We can make it like mandatory for new high rises being constructed to have cell towers on their rooftops. And while this does sound like a scientifically sound solution, it's very costly to install so many towers on every single corner of every single street of every single city. It just doesn't make sense. So maybe a planned out method, an efficient method of installing these towers and antennas in places where they can reach a maximum range without any blockage, and thus minimizing the number of towers that need to be installed. Maybe that could help in the future.
yeah,
But apart from that, we have other minor issues actually with this technology. One of them being battery drain and heating up of devices, because 5G would obviously drain a lot more battery from your phone or laptop, whichever device you're using. But I think as the technology improves and as it becomes more mainstream, companies will start taking care of all these issues. Another problem that has that exists with 5G is that while download speeds have improved drastically, there is not much improvement in upload speeds. If
yeah,
you see Tesla, upload speeds are still very close to theoretical upload speeds of 4G. And
yeah,
the dream of ever uploading a 4K video in a few seconds, I think that's going to take another generation to come.
yeah, probably another generation. And like you spoke about it being very similar to 4G, I think another problem is with the low band technology of 5G, it quite virtually is 4G on steroids because the real output you get is the theoretical speed of 4G, which is not a significant improvement. And then if you have to make the trade-off for like long range, it's not that big an upgrade from 4G. So we'll have to see how that goes, especially in rural areas where long range will be the priority, one, and two, also in developing countries where they might not have the amount of money required to spend on setting up many 5G towers that will enable a short range to work well across the city. So
Right.
that's obviously like governmentalist aspects to look at. Your aircraft analogy actually reminded me of a huge issue that 5G posed to the aviation industry a few months ago. and I don't think it's been solved entirely yet in an optimal way. So essentially, aircraft have something called a radio altimeter, which becomes active when they descend to like 5,000 or 2,500 feet, and it starts measuring their altitude relative to the ground by sending a radio signal and measuring the time that it takes to bounce back to come up, sort of like how a sonar or a radar quite literally works. So since it's radio waves, and since, as we discussed earlier, that 5G sort of the wavelength and frequency lies on the threshold of microwaves and radio waves, um, 5G actually causes interference in these radio altimeters, which causes them to give back wrong readings to not only the flight computers, but also the pilots. And that is a huge safety issue. So in the case of good visibility, pilots can easily land visually, but in the case of poor visibility, the task of landing is actually left to the flight computers. And this is something called a category 3 landing, where the plane lands on autopilot itself and it relies entirely on the altitude readings it gets from the radio altimeter. So if you have wrong readings coming in, then the flight computers are going to be giving wrong inputs to the flight controls, and you would have potentially just disastrous results and consequences of that. So I think the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration of the US, they put down a notice saying that no 5G towers can be put around on near airports and airfields. And even that's a short-term solution, but they will have to work on that for the long term, especially with Boeing aircraft. They seem to be more prone to this because of the frequencies they use. So that's a scary thing that we need to look into. And now let's look into some not so very scary things about 5G, which people believe to be extremely scary though. Um, the
Yeah, I think
myths.
it's time to debunk some myths now.
Yeah.
So, the first myth that we've heard is that 5G, or for that matter, any wireless cellular standard, causes cancer. Okay, now here's the thing. A banana is more likely to cause cancer than 5G. Let me explain what I mean. The electromagnetic
No, wait, you mean a
spectrum is,
banana? Like a banana?
yes, a banana, the fruit that you eat, that
Oh,
banana.
damn.
Yeah. Let me explain what I mean. So the electromagnetic spectrum is made up of various sections ranging from low frequency to high frequency. The lowest frequencies are the radio waves and the microwaves, in which our cellular networks fall. For example, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, our Wi-Fi networks, all of the communication networks, they fall in these low frequency bands. And at higher frequencies, we have X-rays and other um,
Gamma.
we have X-rays, gamma rays, all of those, especially the ones that are emitted by radioactive nuclei. So here's the thing: bananas are made up of a lot of potassium, and there are two isotopes of potassium, 39 and 40, out of which potassium 40 is radioactive and can emit harmful radioactive waves. And these radioactive emissions can actually penetrate our skin, and if they hit the right cells, they can actually cause cancer. That's why I said that a banana is more likely to cause cancer than 5G. The truth is that 5G waves are, the frequency is just too low to penetrate our skin and cause any sort of biological damage. There have been many tests and experiments conducted. And the data has shown that in the experiments which proved that 5G causes um, biological damage, there were always some problems with the experimental conditions or other sorts of background conditions, which did not give accurate test data. And in the tests that actually prove that 5G does not cause biological damage, those tests were sound and foolproof. And I think various agencies and governments are now trying to debunk the myth that radio waves do not actually cause cancer. The
Yeah.
only downside of these radio waves is they have a lot of heating effect because especially the 5G waves themselves, like I said, they fall into the microwave section of the electromagnetic spectrum, the same microwaves that heat your food in a microwave oven. So yes, while they do have a heating effect on the tissues that are directly in contact with them, that's not really much of a health hazard or a biological concern. So we really don't have much to worry about when it comes to cancer or any such biological problem.
Yeah. And I don't know what it is with 5G and myths about sea diseases, but 5G, like, no, like people thought 5G causes COVID.
Yeah,
Like,
I
no,
I
just
just can't wrap
because
my head
that's
around.
like the biggest correlational assumption I've seen in my life. Like, just
I mean,
because 5G comes around in like 2019, 2020, especially in China and the US and the West, and because COVID originated in China around that time and then spread first in the West and then came to India, Indians especially just love to believe that COVID was aggravated because of 5G. Like, let's just put
yeah,
that to rest. That is not true. It is not true for various reasons because one, there is no scientific evidence to show that microwaves cause a virus to multiply and quicker, and two, it is biologically incorrect. Okay, so no, that is not true. And I think that was a you leave it to the British, they will make a mess of anything. I believe they made some currency sort of thing that what was that, Richard?
yeah. So apparently there was a myth, which I read about, that someone said that the 20-pound note has a symbol of a 5G tower and the coronavirus on top of it. I don't know
Oh no.
how
Oh
I
no.
don't know how it came up, but no, there is not a 5G tower, and no, there is not the coronavirus. Those are some historical monuments, I believe, which are from Britain itself. So for all those who believe that 5G causes coronavirus, no, just no.
Right. Anyway, speaking
Yeah.
of 5G in India, let's move on to the 5G rollout that we're seeing in India coming soon. It's looking pretty interesting and it's going to be quite an important auction for these companies.
Yeah. So I believe just some very recent news updates have come in that from the 1st to the 4th of October, there'll be a conference, and all the big players in this industry, especially Jio, Airtel, Vodafone Idea, will be discussing and planning and starting their rollout for 5G in India. And I believe 4th and 5th October are the dates set for the rollout of 5G in the major metropolitan cities of India. For example, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, to name a few. But one thing that we should touch upon over here is that all of these companies will be using the lower bands of the 5G network, the low and mid-range bands, and they'll be using existing 4G technology hardware to provide 5G cellular network to their customers.
Yeah, like I
Um,
said earlier, it's pretty much 4G on steroids, especially in developing countries.
yeah,
So,
exactly. And to quote exactly what you said, this version of 5G will be giving us the theoretical speeds of what 4G promised. And while that sounds not so good, I think it's still a step forward that we are getting higher speeds, lower latency, especially because we are not compromising on the range of these towers, right? If we were to go into the higher bands with the millimeter waves, then we'll be really compromising on the range. And we would have to install a huge number of towers and a huge number of antennae. And that's very, very costly. So, yeah, Hriday, what do you think? How do you think this
yeah,
entire
I'm
matter is
I'm
going to
excited to see how they played out, like especially the big three, Jio, Airtel, and Vodafone Idea. It'll be
Yeah,
really interesting to see how they bid, for which range of frequencies they bid, because their entire business strategy will be dependent on the range they get.
of
It's
course.
going to be very interesting, and I have reason to believe that they will all be having a similar strategy. especially Airtel and Vodafone Idea, given that Jio is now the dominant player in the market and Airtel Vodafone Idea are sort of similar. Um, it will come down to outbidding the other and
Of
then
course.
making up for that cost through a better strategy, and then or it'll come down to bidding smartly, bidding less, and then outperforming, like sort of an undercut, for
Yeah.
UF1 fans, if you all know. Um, yeah,
And since we mentioned costs, as a side note, if people have been following the market, if our viewers have been following the market, actually the telecom companies in India have not been performing very well. They've been on a down for quite some time now, and yet when the bidding came for 5G, they made pretty high bids, which goes to show how much trust and faith they have in this new technology. So hopefully it works out well for all of us.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think let's just end on the note of what 6G might hold for us, given
Right,
that 5G is already so progressive.
right. So it seems weird talking about 6G when 5G is still on its rollout plan. But here's the thing, companies always start preparing for the future, for the next generation, when the previous one is already in motion. And the reason for that is by doing so, they secure their own future and they are confident that they will be able to sell newer devices with these upgraded systems. So as we know, as of now, Samsung and Qualcomm have already started working on the next generation of wireless communication. They started working on 6G, and it's planned to roll out in 2030 with speeds of up to 1 terabyte per second. That is
Jeez.
about 5 times, yeah, one
No, that
terabyte per
shouldn't be
second.
legal. That should not be legal.
That's like 5 times of what 5G is offering as its theoretical maximum. So
I mean,
I
do
don't
we
know. You
even
could
really
probably
need
give
that amount of speed? I mean, think about the amount of
unless you're
energy that's
someone
going to
who wants
require. Like,
that is
it's going to
yeah
have tons of
that is going to
energy.
be very very taxing on energy, and I
Yeah,
think
I think
many
it's
governments and
unnecessary,
organizations,
but I
it is
mean,
for
it's
so
necessary if you want the
see
future to look like the entire world on a supercomputer as a metaverse. It's not necessary if you really want to save the world and not harm resources. I mean,
right of course
we spoke about that in our first episode on
in
renewable
renewable
energy,
energy. Yeah, go
but
check out the first
it's
episode of
scary.
season.
Yeah, go go
Yeah,
ch-
it's
go check
very
that out.
scary. Yeah. But I think to be fair, we are considering the available technologies right now.
Yeah,
But when 6G comes out, 6G will be around from probably 2030 to the 2040s. And in that time, we don't know what technologies we'll have. And maybe we will need 6G to sustain that. But like you said, it's going to come at the cost of energy. So governments and organizations around the world should come up with a standard for them for putting like say a ceiling on how far is too far and
yeah,
not allow G to go beyond a certain limit.
yeah,
But apart from that, I think the future looks really good for speed
yeah.
and frequency.
Speed.
Speed.
Yeah. Yeah, so on that note, I think that's enough on 5G. But before we end, we just want to ask you about for your opinion. So I think amongst us, we've been planning to have a debate for one of the upcoming episodes, and we're confused on whether we should have it Android versus iPhone, or whether we should have it Linux versus Mac OS versus Windows. So drop in your suggestions in the comments box and let us know. So we'll choose the topic and then we can go head to head. Just a heads up though, Rishit and I are proper Windows and Android boys. So all
Yep.
you Apple
I'm very
fanboys
excited for
there,
this conversation.
um, we hope you like the new iPhone 14. Um,
Yeah, we really hope you like
yeah, we
the
do.
remake iPhone 13. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, Steve Jobs' daughter is shaming her father's company on Twitter. I mean, oh wait, we'll just save that.
yeah.
We'll save that for the we'll save.
We'll I think we have a
Oh,
lot of
also
stuff to talk.
look up BODMAS before you show up for that episode.
Right,
Look up
of
BODMAS
course.
before you look at that episode. Yeah, it'll come
Yeah,
handy.
just in your mathematics skills a bit.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, so
All right.
with that, thanks so much for tuning in for our fourth episode, and we hope you enjoy it. Catch you in the next one.